بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء اتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Inshallah, today will be our second section or second part of our get-together where we're talking about the ahkam of Ramadan or some of the rulings pertaining to fasting in the month of Ramadan. And yesterday we got into a bit of an introduction speaking about that, where we spoke about the obligation of the fasting of the month of Ramadan. We also spoke about the pillars of fasting, and we mentioned that the pillars of fasting were two. The first one being having the intention or the niyyah, and we spoke about that in a bit of detail. And also the second pillar being protecting oneself from falling into those things that will break the person's fast. Al-imsak al-mufattirat fi nahari Ramadan. And we spoke about the things that break the fasting in the day of Ramadan, and we went to a bit of detail speaking about that yesterday. Similarly, towards the end of yesterday's session, we mentioned the list of people who it is obligatory upon to fast. So those people who fit these certain criteria, they are obligated to fast, and we mentioned them being the Muslim who is aqil, a person who's sane, baligh, has reached the age of puberty, muqim, is in their locality and they're not traveling, and they have the ability to fast, and there is nothing that is preventing them. They don't have any preventative affairs or preventative issues that are preventing them from performing the siyam. So we're going to expand upon that we mentioned at the end of yesterday's session and speak about that briefly and talk about who are the people that are exempted from fasting, because from this list of people we understand that they are exemptions. There are people who fasting is not obligated upon them due to certain circumstances, and those circumstances are different from case to case and situation to situation, and based upon the different situations, then they have different ahkam and different rulings. So if the person fulfills these conditions that we mentioned, then it is obligatory for them to fast. Right? We said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentioned فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْهُ. Whoever reaches the month of Ramadan, then it is obligatory for them to fast, so long as they fulfill these conditions that we mentioned. And that's a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in this situation the command necessitates that it is obligatory. Right? طيب. So the first one we mentioned was the Muslim. So what that means is the non-Muslim, the person who's a kafir, who's not a Muslim, fasting is not obligated for them. And if they do fast, it's not accepted from them. If they do fast, it's not accepted from them. In usul, there is a difference of opinion as to whether the kafir or the disbeliever, it's obligatory for them to do the ahkam of the religion. Is it obligatory upon them or not? There's a difference of opinion, but that's not the time right now to discuss that. The point I'm trying to make here is, if a non-Muslim decides, I'm going to fast today with the Muslims, a non-Muslim comes and says, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to do all of those things that the Muslims do from morning to night, there is no reward for them to begin with, because it's not obligatory for them, because they haven't fulfilled the first condition, which is being a Muslim, right? If a person does not believe in La ilaha illallah, then all of the other ahkam that they do, whether it's siyam or salah or hajj, it's not accepted from them, because they have to first be a Muslim. So that's the first condition. طيب. And if a person who in the situation is not a Muslim and he becomes Muslim, then it's obligatory for them to fast. Fasting now becomes obligatory upon them once they become Muslim. So for example, we're in the month of Ramadan, for example, and we're fasting, and a non-Muslim comes and accepts Islam, takes his shahada during the day of Ramadan, and people are fasting. We tell that person, you've become Muslim, the remainder of the day, they should stay away from eating and drinking and anything that breaks their fast, and from there on they continue. From there on they continue and they fast, because now they've entered into Islam. Now fasting has become obligatory upon them. Is it necessary for them to fast previous whatever they have missed before Islam? We mentioned that they don't have to, because Aslan is not counted for them, and it's not required for them. Allah in the Quran says, قُلْ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِن يَنْتَهُوا يُغْفَرْ لَهُم مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ. Allah says that, tell the disbelievers that if they take the heed and they enter into Islam and they stop what they're upon, the disbelief that they're upon, Allah will forgive all of their previous deeds. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Islam yahdimu ma kana qablahu. So the person it's not necessary for them to say, oh, you're 30 years old, you're 40 years old, the last 40 years make it up. They're not obligated to do so. It might, and if a person is told to do that, it might be even a reason for the person to run away from the deen and say, this religion is too difficult. They want me to fast all these days and not eat and not drink for all the days that I've missed. Forget about that. The point of the situation here, or the discussion here, is that the person who is not a Muslim, if he fasts, that fast is not accepted. Once he enters into Islam, then fasting becomes obligatory upon them. طيب. And the issue I mentioned of the person beginning his fast from the moment he starts, and the person enters into Islam, and if it's in the day of Ramadan, he has to continue fasting. We have a hadith about that. The Prophet ﷺ, the authentic hadith of Salama ibn Akwa' في Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, it mentions that before Ramadan became obligatory, before the month of Ramadan became obligatory to fast, what was obligatory for the Muslims to fast was the day of Ashura. The day of Ashura, which is the 10th day of Muharram, that used to be obligatory to fast before Ramadan. So when the 10th day of Muharram arrived, the Prophet ﷺ commanded some of the companions to go to the different parts of Al-Madinah and to tell the people that today is Muharram, to be fasting, and if you haven't started fasting, then stop eating now and begin fasting. So, and the Prophet ﷺ did not ask those people who began in the middle of the day and they ate breakfast or they ate before, he didn't ask them to make up their fast. So the scholars use that hadith as a proof that the person who enters into Islam, if he enters in the middle of the day, he has to start fasting immediately. طيب. The second exemption that a person is exempted from fasting is the child before reaching the age of puberty. We mentioned that if a person is baligh, they have to fast. So a child who hasn't reached the age of puberty, it is not obligatory for them to fast. And this is based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that has been collected by Ahmad, Abu Dawud and Nasa'i. The Prophet ﷺ said, رُفِعَ الْقَلَمُ عَنْ ثَلَاثٍ, that the pen has been lifted for 3 individuals. Their deeds are not recorded. عَنِ النَّائِمِ حَتَّى يَسْتَيْقِظ, the person who's sleeping up until they wake up, while they're in the state of sleep, their qalam is marfu', their deeds are not being recorded. That's number 1. Number 2 is the person who is a child, الصغير حتى يكبر, the child up until he grows older. Once he grows older and he reaches the age of puberty, then it's obligatory for them to do the acts of worship. And in this situation, in this discussion, fasting. And the third one is وَعَنِ الْمَجْنُونِ حَتَّى يَفِيقِ, and upon the person who's insane up until they regain their sanity. And we'll speak about the issue of the majnoon and the person that comes under that bab. So the child that hasn't reached the age of puberty is not obligatory for them to fast. Once they reach the age of puberty, then it's obligatory for them to fast. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ used to train the children, the ones that have the ability to fast, used to train them by telling them to fast in the month of Ramadan. Especially the ones that are closer to the age of puberty and are able to hold themselves back, they would teach them, because you need to teach early. The child needs to be taught early on these ibadat so that they can normalize it in their lives. So this is a practice that the companions used to do, that they would teach them and train them by, telling them to fast while they were younger, especially when they're towards the age, closer to the age of to puberty. And you even see in the hadith that sometimes when the children will get a bit hungry, some of the companions will give them, some small dolls or some things made out of wool that the kids can play with to distract themselves from the hunger up until the time comes to break fast. And طبعا if the child is not able to, then it's not obligatory, so you don't bring the child any harm and force them. But that's only done min bab at-tadrib, from the angle of training them to prepare for when they get older to fast. Okay, another point here, just before we move on, is when is a person considered to have reached the age of puberty in the first place? Right? What is the measurement to know that, okay, this child or this person has reached the age of puberty? Generally speaking, it's one of four things. Or four things, if any of these four things happen, that person is considered to have reached the age of puberty. The first one being in ejaculation, inzalul mani. So ejaculation, and this applies to both men and women. If this happens, then they have reached the age of puberty. It's upon them to fast the month of Ramadan, and it's upon them to do the other ibadat, acts of worship. طيب. The second one is if the male or the female have grown pubic hair, then that is a sign that they have reached the age of maturity, and it's upon them to fast. The third one is if they've reached the age of 15. Meaning, if these other things did not happen, but they reached the age of 15, if the person 15 years old and above, then they have to fast. They've reached the age of puberty or maturity. And it happens sometimes where a person they might be delayed in these things, but they reach 15 years old and they still haven't. These affairs have never occurred to them. In any case, and that's based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But the fourth is that, and this is specific for the women, is the menses. The fourth is the menses. طيب. And this is specific, as I mentioned, to the women. This is specific to the woman, that if she gets her monthly menses, then she has to begin her fasting for the month of Ramadan. Even if she's at a younger age, maybe, because sometimes it happens where women begin their menses young, 10 years old, 9 years old, then they begin, and their parents are enforced and teach them how to fast and how to do the other acts of worship. In any case, these are indications that the person has reached the age of puberty. It's wajib for the person to be fasting the month of Ramadan. طيب. The next exemption, the next person who's exempted from fasting is the person who is insane, majnoon. The person who ذهب عقله. He has no mental faculties. He is unable to distinct right and wrong. This person, as we mentioned in the hadith prior, we just mentioned, is marfu' al-qalam. He's exempted, and his deeds are not recorded. Right? لأن مناط التكليف هو العقل. Right? The place where the person is mukallaf and the person is held accountable is the person has to have intellect and understanding. Once the person has the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, then that person is considered to be somebody that understands and is aqil. Okay? So that person, if the person is insane, then it's not obligatory for them until they regain their sanity. طيب. Similarly, what's it called? As I mentioned, it's based on the hadith. وَعَنِ الْمَجْنُونِ حَتَّى يَفِيقِ. طيب, what if the person's he's in the situation where he bounces in and out. Sometimes he has his mental faculties and sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he has control and sometimes he doesn't. Ramadan, he might be in the month of Ramadan, the first 15 days of the month of Ramadan, the first half of Ramadan, he was marfu' al-qalam. He was insane. However, that was lifted off him and he was healthy in the last 15 days. Then that person has to fast. Okay. Similarly, okay, there's certain situations that are close to it, and that is the old person, the old person who's reached the age of senility, he's senile. بمعنى the person can, again, he's lost the sense, his faculties of disseminating and distinguishing what is right and what is wrong, because he's lost his sanity because of old age, haram. Then that person is exempt from fasting, and it's not upon him to fast. And similarly, when a person is when it's in old age and they're reaching to that level, similarly they don't become senile fully all of a sudden. However, there's stages. They go through a point where sometimes they have the faculties and sometimes they don't. Then the situation, similarly, in that situation, if they have the understanding, they fast, and if not, then they are marfu' al-qalam. And the person who is insane in that situation, he is marfu' al-qalam. He does not have to make up any fasting, because aslan he was not held accountable to begin with. The person was not held accountable to begin with. Okay, if somebody becomes, and this is connected to this chapter as well, if somebody is, loses they lose consciousness, they faint, or they go into a coma, or they are, they have to be put to sleep for an operation. What happens in that circumstance? If the situation happens where the person made the niyyah to fast and was fasting, and while fasting this happened to them, they fell unconscious, or they fell into a coma, or they're in an operation and they're put to sleep while fasting, then their fasting is not broken. Their fasting is intact and it's okay, unless they do something else that intentionally breaks their fast. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But there's discussion about that mas'ala in itself. طيب. So in summary, we mentioned that the person has to have his mental faculties and has to be sane to be for fasting to be obligatory upon them. If not, then they don't have to fast. طيب. The fourth thing is connected to the person's ability and health, and there's several categories and several situations in this specific one. And the first one, so we mentioned that if the person has the ability to fast, they have the qudra to fast, they have to fast. So there are situations where the person, for one reason or another, does not have the ability to fast. So if that happens to them, then they have different ahkam and rulings depending on what it is. For example, some things the person is unable to fast permanently, meaning they're unable. They're only in a situation where they cannot fast, right? Whether it's an illness that they cannot recover from it. They have a certain illness, and that illness is an illness that they're forced to break their fast, or they're forced to eat, and there is no cure for them to recover from that illness. They're forever going to be with that illness. All right? That person, in that situation, they don't have to fast. They don't have to fast, but rather they feed. They pay the fidya, and we'll speak about that shortly, inshallah. Similar to that is a person of old age. A person of old age, and they don't have the strength to fast. Sometimes a person which is old, some people are old in age, but they have the strength to fast, and it won't affect their health. But some people, they reach old age, and they have their mental faculties, they're not insane, they're sane, they're fully understanding and cognizant. However, their health does not allow them to fast. And age cannot be reversed, of course. A person cannot become young and they cannot be reversed. So, therefore, that person similarly pays the fidya. Alright? And the fidya, which we'll talk about shortly. So, the old person who's old, and that's based on, we see that also from we see Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. Anas ibn Malik lived a long life. He died in his mid to late 90s radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. As you all know, Anas ibn Malik was the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, who was the servant of the Prophet ﷺ. When Rasulullah ﷺ moved to Al-Medina, Anas ibn Malik, his mother, brought him to the Prophet ﷺ and told him that keep him with you as a servant. And he used to be the khadim of the Prophet ﷺ. And he was young in age radiallahu anhu. When the Prophet ﷺ died, he was young, he was a teenager radiallahu anhu. And Prophet made dua for him. He made dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him long life and many children. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted the dua of Anas ibn Malik. So when Anas reached an old age, as it's recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari, he was unable to fast. So what he would do, radiallahu anhu, was he would pay the fidya, which is that you feed a poor person for every day that you miss. So Anas ibn Malik was unable to fast the 30 days. He would, towards the end of Ramadan, feed 30 people one time. He would one time cook for a meal for 30 people and feed them. So it's permissible for you to feed 30 people at one time, or to make a meal each day for a poor person. So long as the poor person is a different poor person, not the same poor person coming back every day for a meal. Because the hadith, because it mentions that you feed a miskin likulli yawmin miskin. For each day you feed a poor person. طيب. Similarly, the person who has the illness that is uncurable, they do the same thing. They pay that fidya, which is feeding a poor person for every day. And this is obviously and the proof for that is obviously based on the ayat and the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, إِذَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Generally speaking, when it comes to the act of worship, the person does the act of worship to the best of their ability. And if they're given a concession or rukhsa, then they apply the concession based on their circumstances. And Allah in the Quran also mentions, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. In another ayah, Allah says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. So this applies here. The person is unable to fast because of this disease that they have, or illness that they have that's uncurable, or old age, then they do not fast, but they pay the fidya, where they feed 30 people. طيب. And the fidya also, the proof of that is in the Quran, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. Allah mentioned that in Surah Al-Baqarah. Okay. Also, the situation of the person who's sick. We mentioned right now the person who has an illness that's uncurable. What if the person has an illness, but the illness is one that they have hope that they will be cured? Okay, and normally that's the person's in that situation. The person is in three circumstances. The first is the person is ill, he's sick, and it's difficult for him to fast. However, it's not difficult for him to fast. He's sick, but his illness is minor. The sickness he has is a minor illness, and fasting would not harm him. He has a very small cough, or he has a sniffles, a little bit of a cold, but it's not going to harm him it's not going to harm his fast. And that person has to fast. That person should not miss, and the person must fast. The second is a person who fasting for him is difficult, meaning if he fasts, it'll be really tough, and they will feel the toughness. However, it will not bring extra harm to the person. It will not put a person in a dangerous situation. However, he will feel it when he's fasting. That person in that situation, then it is recommended for them, and it's better for them to break their fast and to eat. And the third is a person who is really sick, and if they fast, it will bring more harm, and it might result in their illness increasing, or it might result in them not being cured, on time. So if that's the situation, the person has to break their fast, and it is not permissible for them to fast. And that's based upon statements of the Prophet ﷺ. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, لا ضرر ولا ضرار. The person should not bring harm to himself. So in that situation, the person does not fast. And this is normally, like these type of situations is normally dictated by health officials. A doctor, they know that they will tell the person, okay, you need to eat, or it's okay, you can fast. So the person needs to take the necessary precautions if they're in a situation where they have some kind of illness, and at the same time they should not be easygoing where any illness that they get, small little sniffles and says, I want to break my fast. That's not the situation. But that's, as we mentioned, if it's going to bring harm to the person, more harm, then the person does not fast. And if it's not permissible for them to fast, it's going to bring them more harm. If it's difficult for them to fast, but they can still do it, it's better for them to break their fast because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them that rukhsah. Allah gave them that concession. And we also have the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves for you to take the concessions just the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates for you to approach sins. That's hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you have a rukhsah, then it's something that it's permissible for you to take. And in this situation, the person who is ill. طيب, this person who is sick, and we'll speak about that afterwards in more detail. The person who's sick, they break their fast. These illnesses here, the ones that we mentioned at the end, that they can be cured and they have a hope that they'll be cured. In that case, they just break their fast and they make up the fasting after they become cured. Right? The situation of paying the fidya is specific for the person who is unable to fast and they will not be able to be cured, or the person who's at a very old age and they're unable to fast. As for the person who does not fast but who's ill but is hoping to be cured, and inshallah by the permission of Allah will be cured, then for them they eat and they break their fast, and once they become healthy they make it up afterwards. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخْرَى. Allah in the Quran says, the person who's fasting or is traveling, and we'll speak about the traveler soon, then for them they make it up afterwards. طيب, which leads us to the next point, which is talking about the person who's traveling. We mentioned that if a person is muqim, they're in their locality, they have to fast. As for the person who's musafir, who's traveling, then it is permissible for them, and they have the rukhsah and the concession to break their fast. And that's based on the ayah that we just mentioned. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخْرَى. A person who's traveling or sick, then they make up the fast another day. Okay? So the traveler breaks his fast. And طبعا that's with the condition that the person is travel. Okay, the person obviously what is known to be urfan. Traveling is accepted. So they're traveling, they're going from city to another city, they're not in their locality. That's considered to be a safar. And they must not intend to be avoiding fasting. They must not be using a hila or finding a hila or a way out to avoid fasting. Some people will say, hey, I ain't trying to do this fasting thing, but there is a concession where if a person is traveling, then they don't have to fast. So I'm going to travel, when Ramadan kicks in, so I can avoid that. No, for that person, they have to fast. And the concession does not apply to them. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but there's some principles in the religion that prevent this type of thinking from happening. Where if a person tries to use some ahkam to, fulfill a certain objective, he'll use certain concessions to fulfill a certain objective that is personal to him, which is wrong. Then his intention is what he intended for. He receives the opposite of what he intended for. So this person intended to avoid fasting by taking the concession. Because of his intention being one that is incorrect, then he receives the opposite, which is the obligation for him to fast, and there is no concession for that person. And there's some examples for that in the religion. Example for that is a person, for example, and you see this if you study inheritance and the rules of inheritance. If a person knows that as a family member who's in the family that I'm going to be inheriting when they pass away and they die, and they have a lot of wealth, but they're living too long, so let's get this person out of the way so we can inherit the money. So they kill the family member. The person kills his father or whoever the person they were going to inherit from for the sake of getting the money. Then that person is prevented from getting that inheritance because of his intention. So similarly, that applies to the person who's fasting and traveling. And there's other examples as well that we find in the religion for that. In any case, the person who's traveling and the safar is a safar that is considered to be travel, then they are allowed to eat in the day of Ramadan. And it's based upon that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. That ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where he said, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So that's with regards to fasting. طيب, if a person is traveling and they're able to fast, it's not too difficult for them to fast and they're able to fast, then no problem. If they think that they can travel while fasting, then there's no problem with them doing so. They're able to fast, they can fast while they're traveling. However, if they want to break their fast, it's permissible for them to fast. If fasting is difficult while traveling, then they should break their fast. And we see this in several ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ was with his companions and they were traveling and they were fasting. And some of the companions, it became difficult for them while they were traveling and fasting. And the Prophet ﷺ commanded to bring some water, and he ﷺ himself broke his fast so that the companions follow him in breaking their fast. And the narration mentions that it was Asr, meaning that the day was almost done. But when he saw that the people were having a difficult time, he was an example for them and broke his fast. In any case, a person is allowed to break their fast while they're traveling. How long is the traveling considered? As long as a person is in a state of traveling, then they can break their fast. The ayah is general, that the person, if is in a travel, then they can make it up the other day. And this happens sometimes with people who are constantly traveling. Their job is to travel. They fly airplanes or whatever, their career is travel based. Then if they're able to fast, no problem. And if they want to take the concession, then so long as they're traveling, they can break their fast, with the condition that once they are in a situation where they're back and they're not traveling, they have to make it up. They have to make up that fasting. طيب, so we mentioned those things. Those are exemptions from fasting. We mentioned about 3 or 4 of them. We mentioned the person who is traveling is exempted. The person who has the illnesses, whether it's an illness that is permanent and they cannot be cured from it, that person, we mentioned, they pay fidya. Similarly, the person who is at old age and is unable to fast, they pay fidya and they're exempted from fasting. The person who has an illness where they're able to be cured, then they break their fast and they make up their fasting afterwards. And we mentioned also the exemption for a person who is insane, the child, and the non-Muslim. Those are all exemptions. Similarly, for the woman, this is for the woman in particular, the woman who has her menses, she is also exempt from fasting. If Ramadan began while she's in her menses, she can't even fast because she's in her monthly menses. She cannot fast up until she becomes pure. However, the moment she becomes pure, then she has to begin fasting. And if it happens that she's in Ramadan and she's fasting, and in the middle of the day her menses begin, then her fast is broken and she has to make up that day afterwards, and the other days that she will be missing for that week or so. She will make it up afterwards. طيب, what if the woman, مثلا, she becomes pure right before Fajr, right before Adhan al-Fajr. She wakes up in the morning, and before Suhoor, she was in her menses, but she became pure, and Adhan has begun, and she hasn't made the ghusl. Right? This is similar to what we discussed yesterday, talking about the person who wakes up in the morning and has not made ghusl from janaba. Their fasting is still counted, but they just make the ghusl. There's no connection to it. Similarly, for the woman, that her fasting is counted, she makes the niyyah and she starts fasting, and she can make her ghusl afterwards, of course, for salah and getting out of the state of impurity. طيب, another exemption of a person who's also exempted from fasting is the woman who's pregnant. The woman who's pregnant, or the woman who is breastfeeding her child. Those two, they are exempted, and it's allowed for them to break their fast. If they're able to fast and they have the strength and ability to fast, they fast. And if they do not fast, either out of fear of their health or out of fear of the child, because in both circumstances, for the woman who's pregnant, the child in the stomach is feeding off her nutrition and what she's eating, as well as when the child is suckling and is being fed from the mother. Similarly, the child's feeding is based on the mother's having nutrition and eating. So if the woman fears for herself or fears for the child, then it is permissible for her to eat. It's permissible for her to break her fast. And there's a hadith talking about this, the hadith of Anas bin Ka'ab. Anas ibn Malik al-Ka'bi عند السنن, the Prophet ﷺ mentions that إن الله وضع عن المسافر نصف الصلاة والصوم وعن المرضع والحبلى. The Prophet ﷺ has dropped for the, or has given the concession and dropped for the traveler half of his salah, and that's referring to the raka'at of the traveler. The raka'at for dhuhr is reduced to 2, and asr is made into half, and isha is made into half. So half of that is dropped for him. 6 rak'ahs out of the rak'ahs he's praying throughout the day is dropped, giving as a concession for the traveler, and also the person who's fasting while traveling, and also for the woman who is either breastfeeding and her child or is pregnant. They are also exempt, and it's permissible for them to break their fast. And the majority of the scholars are of the opinion that it is allowed for them to break their fast in the month of Ramadan. There is a difference of opinion with regards to the woman is pregnant, or the woman is she has a child that she's breastfeeding. What does she do? What does she do after? Does she fast and make up the days that she missed? Does she pay fidya? What does she do? There's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Several aqwal about this issue. Majority of the scholars say that she makes up her fast after her pregnancy is done, and after she's finished her suckling. Whenever she's able, she has the ability to fast, she fasts and makes up those days at her convenience. That's one opinion of the scholars, and it's the opinion of the majority of the scholars. Some of this ulama, and this is based on the statement of Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, and some of the other Sahaba as well, and some of the Salaf, they mention that the woman who is pregnant or the woman who is breastfeeding, she gives fidya. She is not required to make up the days, and she rather gives fidya, meaning she gives food to a poor person every day that she misses. And there are also other opinions about the issue as well. However, the majority say that the woman makes up her fasting. But if she's in a situation where the missed days become too much, she has back-to-back pregnancy and giving birth and breastfeeding and back-to-back, it happens where a woman she'll have a streak of 5-6 years straight where she has a child, 9 months she's pregnant. In that process, she probably missed Ramadan. Depending on the timing of the year, she might miss Ramadan and a half. And then she's suckling, she's child rearing a child. That some children, it takes a long time, a year, 2 years. She has 3-4 children. Next thing you know, it's 7 Ramadan she has to make up. And it's difficult for her. The asl is she has to make it up. But if it becomes too difficult, sometimes it becomes too difficult for the person to make it up. Some of the scholars say in that situation she takes the statement that the opinion, which is opinion that is mu'tabar, based upon the statements of some of the Salaf and the Sahaba, Abdullah ibn Abbas being one of them, Ibn Mas'ud, that she pays a fidya for every person. In any case, the asal is the person makes up the fasting. And we're not going to go into too much detail about the reasoning for why one says it. One saying that it's qiyas upon the person who's sick, while the other person says no, it's qiyas upon the one who is the person who was unable to permanently. In any case, there's a deep discussion about the mas'ala. But in any case, the woman who's pregnant and the woman who is breastfeeding is also exempted from fasting. If she's able to fast, she fasts. If it's harmful to her, then she does not fast. طيب. So these are the exemptions that we've mentioned, and that's based upon the beginning of the lesson when we mentioned that it's obligatory. Those people that are not exempted, it's obligatory for them to fast the month of Ramadan. Okay, those people that were exempted, some of them we mentioned, they never have to make it up, right? They just pay. For example, the old man who is unable to fast, he can't fast, so there's no qada for him. He just pays the fidya and keeps it moving. Similarly, the person who is permanently ill, al-marad alladhi la yurja bur'uhu, that person does not make up and he pays. And then there's somebody that they have to make it up. They have to make it up. Like the person who's sick and they become better, the traveler, the woman, ala qawlin, they have to make up the fasting. They have to make up the fasting. So when the person is making up the fasting, they have to work on making up the fasting as soon as they're able to fast. Very important. If you missed a day due to sickness or traveling or whatever other exemption or concession that was legitimate for you to miss fasting, then as soon as that is lifted off you, you have to make up the fast as soon as you have the ability to, and try. And it's okay for you. There's nothing wrong as long as you make it up before the next Ramadan. Then you do so, but you work as hard as possible, because that's a debt that you have to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to make up. If it happens though that you are still have that exemption for one reason or another, then العلة يعني الحكم يدور مع العلة وجودا وعدما. The person is still, if the person is still in that situation, then the person, he still has the concession, he still has the exemption up until it's removed. They're not a traveler anymore, they're not pregnant anymore, whatever it might be. They're not ill anymore, whatever the situation might be. And Allah knows best. So the person has to make it up as soon as possible. طيب. So that's generally with regards to some of the exemptions. And we mentioned yesterday other ahkam talking about the pillars. In any case, the month of those discussions were mainly talking about, we spoke about, was mainly revolving around rulings connected to fasting. So Ramadan is coming up, and Ramadan, when the month of Ramadan begins, of course you all know that Ramadan is the 9th month of the lunar calendar. So طبعا the months enter based on the moon being sighted. And that's a whole different issue on its own. The issue of the entrance of the month of Ramadan and sighting the moon, and whether the moon is and how that's done, and the issue of moon sighting versus calculations. And we're not going to go into the details of that, but in any case, the month begins when the moon is seen. لقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم صوموا لرؤيته وأفطروا لرؤيته. When you see the moon, fast, and when you see the moon at the end, you break your fast for Eid. طيب. So when that starts, the month of Ramadan begins, then everything that we mentioned, speaking about the intention and all of the ahkam, we discussed about staying away from those things that break your fast, and who is fasting obligatory upon, and who are those that are exempted from fasting. It's important to understand all of those ahkam, because as we mentioned in the very beginning, if you want your act of worship to be accepted and correct, it has to be first and foremost ikhlas, khalisan liwajhi Allahi. It has to be done for Allah's sake alone, and it has to be done according to how the Prophet ﷺ wants that act of worship to be done. So it has to be according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So the person who is doing that fasting, who is obligatory upon him to fast, has to actually learn what the Prophet ﷺ told us about fasting. What do I have to do? What am I not supposed to do? So on and so forth. And we mentioned, not all, but we mentioned, a decent amount of some of the things that we need to know, specifically with regards to fasting. Some of the important things with regards to fasting, we mentioned that fasting begins when the sun is rising. Sunrise, first the adhan of Fajr, the second adhan of Fajr is when the people stop. That's when imsak begins. And sunset, adhan of Maghrib, is when the fasting is broken. And the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that the person delays their suhoor, or their morning breakfast, the suhoor, to the very last moment, right? To their very last moment, up until the adhan is made. And it's the sunnah that the person hastens and eats the iftar as soon as the adhan begins. And there is barakah in eating suhoor, as the Prophet ﷺ said, تَسَحَّرُوا فَإِنَّ فِي السُّحُورِ بَرَكَةً. Have the morning suhoor, or the morning breakfast, because there's blessing in that breakfast in the morning, right? So you do that as soon as the adhan is done, adhan is made, afwan, and the adhan starts, then the person stops eating, except for that which is in their hand. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, if the adhan is made and the well is, or the utensil is in their hand, then they eat from what's in their hand. You don't go to the kitchen and rush for finding more food and try to dig up whatever you can to eat, you just, whatever, once the adhan is made, the person stops. طيب. And for iftar, the person breaks as soon as they hear the adhan, sunnah being breaking your fast with some water and some dates. If the person, for some reason, they're in a situation where they don't even have food to break their fast, there's for one reason or another, then the person makes the niyyah of breaking the fast, that the fast has been completed. If there are any other questions, inshallah, you can send your questions. We'll answer them whatever we can towards the end, particularly with regards to fasting. Some of the other ibadat, of course, that we do in Ramadan include qiyam. As the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man qama Ramadana imana wa ihtisaban, ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbihi." Whoever stands up in the month of Ramadan, imanan, they have correct iman. They're doing this amal for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Ihtisaban, they're expecting the reward only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah forgives their sins. So this is an important ibadah that we do in the month of Ramadan. Other than fasting is also praying at night, praying the tarawih, praying the qiyam, right? How much is the tarawih prayed? طبعا the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Ramadan, particularly the hadith mentioning what he ﷺ did, is he ﷺ prayed 11. However, we have the general hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentioning that qiyamul layl or salatul layl is in twos, mathna, and when the night it comes to an end, then the person prays witr to cap off his qiyamul layl. And the Sahaba themselves prayed different amounts, radiallahu anhum. Some of them prayed 23, some of them have been reported to have prayed 36. So there is no official cap to how much the person can pray the tarawih at night. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ's action was specific, that he, it was recorded that he ﷺ prayed 11, ﷺ. But that does not mean that the person has to only pray 11. If he wants to pray more, it's permissible to do so. If they happen to be praying in a masjid where they pray more than 11, then the person follows the imam in that masjid and prays along with them, right? And leaving if a person says, I'm only going to pray 11 in a masjid that prays 23 or 36, and they don't finish with the imam, then they lose out on the reward that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. Rasulullah mentioned, a person who prays behind the imam until the imam finishes the salah, then it is written for him that he has prayed the whole night. Man salla ma'al imam hatta yansarif, kutiba lahu qiyamu layla, the Prophet ﷺ said. So that's a major opportunity for a lot of reward in the month of Ramadan that you will lose out on if you decide to do that. In any case, it's a mas'ala that's in any case open, and the person is allowed to pray as much as they can at night, and to take advantage of that in the month of Ramadan in general and in specific towards the last 10 days of Ramadan, which we will speak about inshallah in our session next week when we speak about preparing to welcome Ramadan. And I'll specifically focus on some of the fada'il of the month of Ramadan and some of the acts of worship that we need to strive towards in the month of Ramadan that are strongly recommended. Some of the things to avoid that will diminish the rewards in the month of Ramadan, a person's reward in the month of Ramadan. Some of the important issues like the last 10 days and Laylatul Qadr. We'll speak about that as well next week. Today we're just mainly focusing on some of the ahkam. Some of the other acts of worship that are done in the month of Ramadan is also i'tikaf, which is an act of worship that is done in the month of Ramadan. Rasulullah, particularly in the last 10 days of Ramadan, he used to make i'tikaf and stay in the masjid, and there are certain ahkam pertaining to i'tikaf, even though the circumstances that we're living through now, which is unprecedented and something that we've never fathomed and imagined seeing in our lifetime, where potentially we will not be able to pray tarawih in the masajid, let alone performing i'tikaf. However, you can pray tarawih at home. There's no problem with that. But i'tikaf is something that is specific for the masjid. So that's something that we will lose out on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. However, there's a lot of other opportunities that we can take advantage of in this coming Ramadan. Inshallah, we will stop there for today. We took a bit of time just to catch up on some of the other things that we missed from yesterday. If there's anything that I said that was of khair and benefit, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mistakes that I've made, which I'm sure I have, it's from my own shortcomings and from shaitan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Until next week inshallah. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.